My husband laughed when his sister said no one would miss me. He wasn't laughing when I vanished. My sister-in-law Amanda smirked and said, "If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice." Laughter erupted around the picnic table, even from my husband, Gregory. I didn't laugh. I lifted my hot dog like a toast, met Amanda's eyes, and said clearly, "Challenge accepted." That night I packed my essentials, cut off all contact, and vanished without another word. 1 year later, I would return to see who had truly been forgotten. Flash back to the beginning, before I ever imagined I could actually leave. My name is Vanessa, 34, and I married Gregory Caldwell 7 years ago. From the start, I always felt like an outsider with his family. When we first started dating in our final year of university, I was a passionate graphic design student working part-time at a coffee shop. He was finishing a business degree, fully bankrolled by his affluent parents. We met when he stopped by the cafe late one night, drawn in by the book I was reading behind the counter. Our connection was immediate and intense, a whirlwind romance that had us inseparable within 3 months. By graduation, he proposed with a diamond ring that probably cost more than my entire student debt. I was swept up by his charm, his confidence, and what felt like genuine love. When we married a year later, I believed I wasn't just gaining a husband, I was joining a family. The Caldwells were everything my own family wasn't. They were wealthy, well-connected, and tight-knit in a way that often felt suffocating. Gregory's father, Richard, had built a successful marketing firm from the ground up. His mother, Patricia, managed their busy social calendar with military precision while also serving on multiple charity boards. Amanda, his older sister, had followed in Richard's footsteps and was already a junior executive at the family company by age 27. The youngest Caldwell sibling, Michael, was the so-called rebel, yet even he landed a cushy job at an uncle's investment firm through family connections. My background, by contrast, was humble and modest. I was raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. My sister Olivia and I shared a tiny bedroom until I left for college. Holidays in my home meant potluck dinners with neighbors and homemade gifts crafted with love. The first time I visited the Caldwell's sprawling colonial estate, I felt like I'd wandered onto the set of a movie about old money families. Everything was ornate and intentional, from the perfectly manicured lawns to the catered meals. I tried my best to fit in, but the differences were always there, subtle yet persistent. In those early years, Patricia would smile and compliment my crafty graphic design work as if it were a child's adorable hobby rather than my profession. Richard often took it upon himself to explain basic business concepts to me over dinner, despite the fact that I had been running my own small freelance design business before I even met Gregory. And Amanda, she had a knack for sweetly correcting my pronunciation of wine varietals or designer brands, as if eager to highlight everything I didn't know about their world. Whenever I brought up these microaggressions to Gregory, he brushed them off gently. "They mean well," he'd tell me. "Amanda's just trying to help you fit in." That's how she shows love. But Amanda's brand of love felt more like a slow-acting poison. At our wedding, as my maid of honor, she delivered a speech that included not-so-subtle anecdotes about Gregory's ex-girlfriends. When we announced we were buying our first home, she innocently questioned whether the neighborhood was the right fit for a Caldwell. If I landed a new client for my business, she'd muse aloud if perhaps they only hired me because of the Caldwell family name. Still, I tried. God, how I tried. I wanted so badly to be accepted by Gregory's family that I bet myself into someone else. I volunteered at charity events with Patricia. I referred potential clients to Richard's firm to show my loyalty. I remembered every family member's birthday with thoughtful gifts. I laughed politely at inside jokes, even when they stung. I adapted my wardrobe to match their country club casual elegance. I bit my tongue and swallowed my working-class pride whenever conversations turned to topics like European vacations or boarding schools, worlds so far from my own upbringing. For the first few years of our marriage, I still maintained my freelance graphic design business. I built a modest client list and even earned some recognition in local design circles. But then Gregory was offered a big opportunity to expand his division at work, an opportunity that involved extensive travel. It was just assumed I would scale back my career to manage things at home while he was away. Without any real discussion, I became the wife who handled the house alone. As Gregory traveled the globe, my business slowly withered to a handful of loyal clients. My once vibrant world narrowed to the confines of our home and the occasional obligatory family event. I grew isolated, a once bright star now dimmed in the shadow of the Caldwell orbit. Last spring, I got pregnant. I dared to hope that maybe a child would finally make me feel like I belonged somewhere, that it would draw Gregory closer or soften the Caldwell's attitude toward me. But I miscarried at 11 weeks. The physical pain was intense, but the emotional pain cut even deeper. Gregory was in Chicago for a conference when it happened. He offered to fly home, but I could hear the relief in his voice when I insisted I'd manage on my own. Patricia sent a bouquet of flowers with a note that read, "Perhaps it's for the best, until you're more settled." Amanda, in her own hurtful way, suggested that maybe the stress from trying to maintain your little business played a part in the miscarriage. Only my sister Olivia truly showed up for me. She flew in and stayed by my side for a week, bringing homemade soup and holding me through nights when I soaked the pillow with tears. The contrast between Olivia's genuine care and my in-laws' clinical, distant concern cracked something deep inside me. I tried to bury that hurt for the sake of peace, but it never quite healed. I felt more alone than ever. By the time the Caldwell's annual summer barbecue rolled around that year, I was a shell of the woman I used to be. The spark I had for design was all but gone. I did my work mechanically. Most of my friendships had faded from neglect. My marriage, from the outside, probably still looked fine, but inside it felt like we were just playing roles. The successful husband and the supportive wife. I was desperately clinging to the hope that if I just held on a little longer, I'd finally truly belong in this family I'd devoted myself to for 7 years. The Caldwell Summer Barbecue was a local institution in their wealthy neighborhood. Every year, Patricia spent weeks orchestrating an elaborate event, down to color-coordinated table settings and a gourmet menu. Richard used it as an opportunity to show off his newest grilling gadgets to his impressed friends. Dozens of relatives, family friends, and business associates would flow through their immaculate backyard, drinking expensive wine and networking under the guise of a casual cookout. It was the kind of event where the family status was both showcased and reinforced. And no matter how many years I had been part of the family, I always knew exactly which side of the insider/outsider line I stood on. On the morning of the barbecue, I rose early and spent 3 hours baking my grandmother's famous strawberry shortcake. It was the one thing I'd brought to previous Caldwell's gatherings that had actually gotten sincere compliments, a little piece of my family that they genuinely enjoyed. I hope maybe this year that dessert might spark some warmth or connection. Meanwhile, Gregory was busy on back-to-back calls, finalizing details for an upcoming business trip to Tokyo. When it was nearly time to go, he hurried me along so we wouldn't be too late. In the car, as I balanced the covered shortcake on my lap, Gregory reminded me with a touch of amusement. Remember, Dad's unveiling his new imported smoker today. Try to act impressed, even if you don't get why it's a big deal. I just nodded. I'd chosen my sundress carefully that morning, a floral number that Patricia had once approved of as cheerful casual. Even so, the dress felt tight across my shoulders, and I found myself tugging at it anxiously. I realized I was bracing myself, as if heading into battle armed with a casserole dish. When we arrived, the Caldwell estate was already buzzing with activity. Caterers in crisp uniforms threaded through clusters of guests, offering canapés and cocktails. Richard was, as expected, stationed proudly on the patio, surrounded by an admiring crowd as he demonstrated the high-tech features of his shiny new smoker. Patricia floated from group to group like royalty, dispensing air kisses and gracious smiles, her laughter chiming over the steady murmur of conversation. We had barely stepped through the side gate when Amanda spotted us. She called out, "Greg," and swept over. She gave her brother an affectionate peck on the cheek and a quick, assessing once over to me. "Vanessa, that dress is so cheerful, isn't it?" she remarked, which sounded like a compliment, though something in her tone felt off. Before I could respond, she added in a breezy tone, "The kitchen's just overflowing with stuff right now, but I'm sure you can find some spot for your contribution." And just like that, she linked her arm with Gregory's and whisked him away to meet some friend from his college days, leaving me standing alone with my dessert in hand. I took a slow breath, swallowed the sting of that dismissal, and went inside to find space in the kitchen. Patricia was in full hostess mode, directing the catering staff on the final setup. When she noticed me hovering uncertainly at the doorway, she offered a polite, distracted smile. "Oh, Vanessa dear, you didn't have to bring anything. We have the patisserie handling desserts," she said, gesturing towards a spread of perfect petit fours and tarts laid out on the counter. "But how thoughtful of you." Her eyes drifted to the carrier in my hands. "Perhaps just set it in the pantry for now." So I did. I walked into the pantry and found a crowded shelf where other offerings from less central guests had been placed out of sight. I set my shortcake there, trying not to feel hurt. As I headed back out, I overheard Patricia speaking to a server. "Be sure to put Amanda's tiramisu at the center of the dessert table. It's Richard's favorite." I paused, closing my eyes for a moment. Of course. Amanda's authentic Italian tiramisu, flown in from an artisanal bakery, no doubt, would take the spotlight, while my dessert, the one thing I'd hoped might make me feel included, literally sat on a shelf in a closet. The next couple of hours were a familiar blur. I drifted through the crowd wearing a practiced, polite smile. I joined conversations only to be politely edged out of them within minutes. If I started chatting with one of Gregory's cousins, Patricia would suddenly appear to pull them away to introduce to someone important. When I offered to help arranging the buffet, a caterer kindly told me they had it under control. I felt like a guest at best, an interloper at worst, in an event that was partly at my home too. I found myself watching how Charlotte, Michael's wife of just 2 years, was treated. Patricia proudly looped her arm through Charlotte's to introduce her as our very own Dr. Charlotte, the brilliant pediatric surgeon. Amanda made sure to include Charlotte in every family anecdote, even ones from years ago that Charlotte wasn't present for. Richard, who barely spoke to me unless necessary, asked Charlotte thoughtful questions about her work at the hospital. I could see that all the attention made Charlotte a bit uncomfortable, but it highlighted a painful truth. She was being welcomed and celebrated, while I was politely tolerated and mostly ignored. Maybe being a doctor earned their respect in a way my career never would. Or maybe Charlotte just fit their mold better. Either way, the contrast was glaring. Finally, it was time to eat. Gregory resurfaced from his business schmoozing and found me to fill a plate. "Having fun," he murmured absent-mindedly, not even looking at me as he asked. Before I could answer, he was already steering me to the long table on the patio where his family was gathering. I ended up seated between Uncle Frank, who was hard of hearing and unlikely to engage in much conversation, and an empty chair reserved for Amanda. Gregory sat directly across from me, deep in conversation with Richard about Japanese business etiquette and his upcoming Tokyo trip. Amanda eventually glided over with her plate and took her seat beside me. The moment she sat down, she commanded the entire table's attention with a lively anecdote about spotting a celebrity at her gym. Everyone tuned into her as if she were a performer on stage. Charlotte asked questions at all the right beats. Patricia and Richard beamed at their golden child. Even Uncle Frank leaned in to catch her words. I sat quietly, picking at my food, waiting for a natural pause so I could maybe bring up something about my life. Anything to feel seen. At a brief lull, I found my opening. I just finished a new branding project for the downtown bakery, I said, trying to inject some enthusiasm. They're having their grand opening next weekend. It was a big win for me. Amanda barely turned her head in my direction. Her eyes narrowed just a touch. Oh, is that the place with the tacky neon sign out front? She asked, feigning polite interest. I drove past it the other day and wondered who chose that. I felt a flush creep up my neck. The sign is actually vintage-inspired, I explained evenly. The owners wanted to honor the building's history. Amanda heaved a theatrical sigh and cut me off, her voice sharp enough to draw attention from the others. If you disappeared tomorrow, she said loudly, no one would even notice. That's how boring this conversation is. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The words hit like a slap. There was a split second of silence, and then laughter cascaded around the table. Actual laughter. Patricia hid a titter behind her napkin. Richard chuckled in a low, approving way. Even Gregory, sitting right across from me, gave a little laugh as he reached for his beer. The only person not laughing was old Uncle Frank, who probably hadn't heard Amanda's joke but joined in the laughter anyway, seeing everyone else amused. I sat frozen, the world around me muffled and distant as if I'd been dunked in cold water. Inside, something snapped into crystal clarity. 7 years of subtle and not-so-subtle slights played back in my mind. The patronizing comments, the exclusions, the quiet corrections, the countless moments I felt belittled or invisible, all of it led to this. To my husband's family openly joking that I could vanish from their lives, and it wouldn't matter. And my husband laughing with them. My face burned with embarrassment and rage, but I refused to let a single tear show. My hands were ice cold, steady as I lifted my hot dog like it was a champagne flute giving a toast. I swallowed every ounce of hurt and forced myself to meet Amanda's eyes across the table. She was smiling triumphantly, clearly pleased with herself. I gave her a slow, deliberate nod and, in a calm voice that cut through the lingering chuckles, I said, "Challenge accepted." The table fell quiet, unsure what I meant. Amanda's smug smile wavered. Gregory glanced between us, confused, sensing a shift but unable to put his finger on it. Patricia, perhaps eager to diffuse whatever that was, chirped, "Who's ready for Richard to carve the brisket?" The moment broke. Conversation and clatter resumed, and my words seemed to fade into the summer air. But I knew what I meant. A line had been crossed, and I was done accepting things the way they were. For the rest of that afternoon, I moved on autopilot. I gave up trying to be part of their world and instead watched them from a distance, as if I were observing strangers. I noticed how effortlessly Gregory fell back in with his family, laughing at their jokes, even when I was the punchline, speaking their language fluently while tossing me the occasional distracted smile. I saw Amanda holding court, the center of everyone's admiration, and recognized a cruel streak in her I'd been excusing for far too long. I saw how Patricia and Richard acted as benevolent monarchs, warmly embracing those who fit their mold and coolly marginalizing those who didn't, all under a guise of polite civility. Most importantly, I listened to a voice inside me, one I'd been shushing for years. It had been whispering that I deserved better, that I mattered. That voice was now loud and clear, and it said, enough. They would not change. So I had to. When it was finally time to leave, I had already formulated the skeleton of a plan. I gathered our things calmly, even managed to thank Patricia for another lovely event and peck her cheek, acting for all the world like nothing was wrong. But inside, I was already packing my heart and resolve for what I knew I had to do. The drive home was silent. Dusk had fallen, and the road stretched ahead in the glow of our headlights as if nothing dramatic had just occurred. Gregory was absorbed in his phone, scrolling through emails and messages about his Tokyo trip. Occasionally, he'd read a snippet aloud, something about a meeting agenda or a flight upgrade. I just stared out the passenger window at the blur of trees and streetlights, running logistics in my mind. What would I need to do first? How much money was in our joint account? Could I slip out tomorrow while he was at work? As we pulled into our driveway and the garage door rolled shut behind us, Gregory finally seemed to notice my silence. "Everything okay?" "You've been so quiet since lunch," he remarked, sounding more perplexed than concerned. I unbuckled my seatbelt and looked at him in the dim interior of the car. "Do you think what Amanda said was funny?" I asked softly. My voice was level, but I felt my heart pounding. He sighed, already exasperated. "Oh, don't start this again, Vanessa. Amanda was just being Amanda. You know how she is at these gatherings. She didn't mean anything by it." "You laughed," I replied, just as quietly. He ran a hand through his hair. "It was a joke. A stupid joke. Not everything needs to be analyzed to death. Can we not do this tonight? I have an early tea time with Dad tomorrow." And with that, he opened his door and got out, effectively ending the conversation. Inside the house, I moved through our familiar rooms with a strange detachment. In the kitchen, I emptied the leftover contents of our picnic cooler. I washed the single dirty dish from breakfast. I was stalling because I knew once I went to bed, morning would come and I'd have to face what I knew I had to do. When I finally slipped into bed, Gregory was already asleep, gently snoring as if it were any other night. I lay on my back staring at the ceiling, adrenaline and heartbreak coursing through me in equal measure. I replayed the day's events on an endless loop, followed by an even longer loop of the last 7 years of my life. Every memory, every compromise, every time I held my tongue to keep the peace, marched through my mind. I remembered the bright, ambitious young designer I used to be, the one who confidently pitched big ideas to clients, who laughed loudly with her friends, who knew her worth. Where had that woman gone? I pictured myself at that wedding altar 7 years ago, hopeful and glowing. Did that younger me ever imagine she'd end up feeling so small and unwanted? A quiet clarity settled over me. I realized that Amanda's cruel joke at the barbecue had not caused my decision to leave. It had simply crystallized what had been building for years. I'd been disappearing in slow motion for a long time, chipping away pieces of myself to fit into their world. She merely dared me to finish the job and truly disappear. And I was finally ready to take her up on it. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I carefully slid out of bed. In the pale light from the hallway, I could see Gregory's face, peaceful in sleep, a face I had loved so much once. I felt a pang, wondering if he'd ever really seen or understood me at all. I left him there and went to my home office down the hall. Closing the door quietly, I opened my laptop and began to methodically map out my escape. I started with our bank accounts. We had a joint savings account that held the money we'd saved for a future down payment on a larger house, among other things. I calculated half of the balance, just what was legally mine, and set up a transfer to my personal bank account that I had maintained since before marriage. I didn't take a penny more than half. Next, I searched for available apartments in Seattle, where my sister Olivia lived. I knew I could lean on her if I needed help finding a place. A month-to-month furnished studio popped up in an area close to her. I emailed the landlord expressing urgent interest. Then I listed out everything I'd need to pack. Essentials only: clothes, important documents, passport, birth certificate, etc., my laptop and design equipment, a few irreplaceable photos and personal keepsakes. I decided I would leave behind anything that wasn't deeply important to me. Let them have the rest, I thought. None of it mattered if I stayed here and lost myself. By dawn, I had outlined a plan. It was rough, but it was a start. I felt surprisingly calm. Next to me, a small suitcase lay open and half filled with a few items of clothing I'd quietly gathered. The hardest part would be executing it under Gregory's nose, but fate intervened. That morning, he left bright and early for a scheduled golf outing with his dad. He gave me an absent-minded kiss on the forehead on his way out, completely unaware that it was the last time he'd see me in that house. The moment I heard his car pull away, I sprung into action. My first call was to my college roommate Jessica. Despite my drifting away from friends over the years, Jessica had remained loyally in touch with me, always sensing when I was pulling back and reaching out anyway. When she answered, I didn't even exchange pleasantries. I need a massive favor, I said, voice trembling slightly now that it was real. She didn't miss a beat. Name it. I'm leaving Gregory. Today. I need help. 2 hours later, Jessica was at my door with coffee, empty boxes, and fierce determination in her eyes. I will never forget the relief and gratitude that flooded me at the sight of her. We didn't waste time on a therapy session. We simply got to work. Together, we moved through the house swiftly, choosing what to pack and what to leave. We packed the essentials I had listed. Enough clothes for a couple of weeks, my important paperwork, the few cherished photos and mementos that mattered, my late father's watch, the photo of mom and me on my college graduation day, a box of letters Olivia wrote to me over the years. We carefully loaded my computer, tablet, and the sketchbooks that contained the raw pieces of my creative self I hadn't looked at in ages. As we packed, Jessica provided a stream of calm, supportive chatter. At one point, while wrapping the framed photo of my mother and me, she said softly, I can store whatever doesn't fit in your car at my place for as long as you need. I nodded and thanked her, my throat tight with emotion. Meanwhile, I handled the final financial and administrative tasks. I completed the bank transfer I'd set up in the night, moving exactly half of our joint savings to my personal account. I logged into all our shared bills, utilities, mortgage, subscriptions, and paid my portion for the month, so I wouldn't be leaving any loose ends or debts for Gregory to deal with immediately. I changed passwords on my personal accounts and made sure my email was signed out on the shared home computer. By mid-afternoon, my life was distilled down to a collection of boxes and suitcases in the trunk and back seat of my car. It was astonishing and heartbreaking how 7 years of life together could be dismantled in a few hours. Jessica hugged me fiercely by my car, both of us sweating and a little dusty from the work. Call me as soon as you're settled tonight, she insisted, holding my shoulders. And Vanessa? I'm proud of you. You're doing the right thing. Tears pricked my eyes for the first time all day. I hugged her back and nodded, unable to find words, but I knew she understood. After she left, I walked back inside alone for one final task. In the quiet stillness of what had been our home, I set a piece of paper on the kitchen counter and began to write. I kept the letter short and factual, an explanation that I needed time away to reevaluate our marriage and myself. I made clear that I had taken only what belonged solely to me, and that I had handled all immediate bills to be fair. I stated that I wanted no contact for the time being, and that I'd reach out when I was ready. I did not reveal where I was going. Next to the letter, I placed my wedding ring. It felt strange sliding it off. My finger had worn it so long that it felt lighter and unfamiliar without the small weight of it. Finally, I took a sticky note and, in neat block letters, I copied Amanda's words from the barbecue. If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. I added the date and the event, Caldwell Barbecue, beneath the quote, like a meticulous little citation of the moment that broke me, and I stuck it beside the ring. Let Gregory, and all of them, remember exactly what had thrown a match on the gasoline that had been pooling in our lives. Before walking out the door, I allowed myself one last look around. My gaze fell on a photo of me and Gregory from our wedding day, framed on the hallway table. We looked radiant, so in love, completely unaware of what life would bring. I gently picked up the frame, memorizing the hope and happiness on that young bride's face, a hope I barely recognized in myself now. Goodbye, I whispered to that girl and the life she dreamed of. I set the photo back down, turned, and left the house without another glance behind me. Driving away from our quiet suburban street was both terrifying and exhilarating. My heart pounded as I passed familiar landmarks, the park where I used to jog, the grocery store we frequented. With each mile that stretched between me and that life, I felt a little more of the tightness in my chest release. By the time I crossed the state line into Washington, I realized I was breathing deeply, fully, for the first time in years. That first night, I only made it as far as a modest hotel off the interstate. I checked in with an alias, paranoid they might come looking, even though that was unlikely, and used the credit card I'd kept solely in my name. The room was basic. A queen bed, a desk, a TV, nothing like the luxury hotels the Caldwells favored. But it was clean and private and mine. After sending a quick text to both Jessica and Olivia to let them know I was safe, I turned off my phone. I imagined Gregory coming home to an empty house, finding my letter and ring. I braced for a rush of guilt or sadness, but all I felt was numb and utterly exhausted. I slept like the dead that night, under a floral motel bedspread, with a freedom I hadn't experienced in a long time. The next morning, I powered on my phone briefly and found the expected flurry of messages from Gregory. They started with confusion. Where are you? What's going on? Vanessa, please. Turn to irritation. This is absurd. Answer your phone. Then to worry masked as anger. Your mother is freaking out. At least tell her you're safe. This is incredibly selfish of you. I have that Tokyo trip in 3 days. What are you doing? The last message read, fine. Take your space. We'll talk when I'm back. Not once in those messages did he mention what had happened at the barbecue, or acknowledge why I might have left. It was as if he still couldn't see it, even now. I sent a single text to my mom and to Olivia, assuring them I was safe but needed to be alone for a while, and that I'd explain when I was ready. I asked them not to share any details with the Caldwells. My mother's concern came through in her one-line response, I love you. Please call soon. And Olivia simply replied with a heart emoji, letting me know she understood. Then I powered the phone off again. I wasn't ready to deal with Gregory or anyone else. Instead, I got back on the road and continued the journey to Seattle, heading toward an uncertain but hopeful future. Seattle greeted me with gray skies and a steady drizzle, as if the city itself were baptizing me into my new life. True to her word, Olivia had already lined up a temporary place for me, a tiny furnished studio in her eclectic neighborhood, available month to month. When I met the landlord to pick up the keys that afternoon, I paid the deposit in cash. He gave me a cursory glance and didn't ask many questions, which I appreciated. The studio was nothing fancy, just one room with a kitchenette, a small adjoining bath, and bay windows that overlooked a busy street. There was peeling paint on the windowsill and the fridge hummed loudly, but it was clean and, most importantly, it was mine. As I hauled my few belongings in, Olivia arrived with a bag of groceries and 2 lattes. She looked around the cramped space with an apologetic smile. It's not the Four Seasons, she joked, referencing the Caldwells' taste for luxury hotels. It's perfect, I assured her and meant it. I ran my hand along the worn countertop, feeling more grounded than I had in ages. It's just mine. We exchanged a knowing smile. That first week was a blur of practical tasks. I opened a new bank account at a local credit union so I could deposit the money I'd transferred without drawing attention. I set up mail forwarding through Jessica's address back home so nothing would go directly to Seattle. I bought a cheap pay-as-you-go phone with a Seattle number, in case I needed a local contact for job purposes. I wasn't ready to answer calls or texts on my primary phone yet. I updated my profiles on freelance job platforms, careful to strip out any references that could tie my work to the Caldwell name or network. I wanted to stand on my own. Messages from Gregory trickled in for the first couple of weeks. They softened from anger to something like pleading. Whatever's going on, we can work through it. Just come home. Please. I read them and felt a pang of sadness for the man I once loved, but I knew if I responded too soon, I might falter. So I didn't respond at all. Instead, I reminded myself of the image of him laughing while I was humiliated. I needed time and space, and I took it unapologetically. Amanda, unsurprisingly, made a public show of the family drama. About 2 weeks after I left, she posted a glossy photo of the whole Caldwell clan, minus me, at some charity gala, captioned, "Family is everything. You can't choose who stays and who goes." It was clearly a dig. The comments were filled with heart emojis and supportive notes from their friends in the community like, "So true," and "Beautiful family." I rolled my eyes and learned to stop checking their social media. I had vanished from their world, and they were performing as though it didn't matter, which only steeled my resolve. One person did reach out genuinely. Charlotte, my brother-in-law's wife, texted me from an unknown number, perhaps knowing I was screening. I heard you left. If you ever want to talk or need anything, I'm here. I believed her sincerity, but I wasn't ready to involve anyone connected to the Caldwells. Not yet. I left the message unanswered, but I appreciated that not everyone in that family was heartless. Instead of dwelling on them, I forced myself to focus on rebuilding me. I unpacked my computer and took on a few small gigs I found online, formatting ebooks for a self-published author, designing social media graphics for a local salon. The work was modest and not the most creatively fulfilling, but it was work. It got me back on my feet, paid the bills, and each completed project was like a little brick in the foundation of my self-confidence. After how my creativity had been belittled for years, I needed to prove to myself that I could stand on my own merit. Knowing I needed more than just work to heal, I also sought out a therapist in my new city. I found Dr. Marsha Lewis, a counselor who specialized in marital issues and family dynamics. Sitting in her small office filled with plants and warm light, I unloaded 7 years of hurt. In our third session, I recounted Amanda's barbecue joke in detail, each word still stinging. Dr. Lewis listened carefully, then observed, "That comment wasn't the cause of your departure. It was the catalyst, the last straw." She leaned forward. "Tell me about the first straw." That question opened a floodgate. I recounted every tiny slight I could remember, every moment I felt lesser than, every time my opinions were laughed off or my accomplishments brushed aside. By the end of that session, I was trembling and in tears, but I felt heard. And more importantly, I felt justified. It wasn't all in my head. I had been gaslighting myself into thinking it wasn't that bad. But it was bad, and it had been for a long time. By the second month in Seattle, I had a routine. I continued therapy weekly. I worked every morning at a coffee shop with Wi-Fi, applying for larger freelance projects and finishing up the small jobs I'd landed. I managed to secure 3 steady clients through those online platforms, nothing glamorous, but enough consistent income to cover rent on the little studio and keep my savings intact. In the afternoons, I explored the city bit by bit, reclaiming simple joys like taking a walk without informing anyone of my plans or browsing in bookstores for pure pleasure. It was during one of those afternoon walks, on a particularly rainy Tuesday, that a new chapter of my life truly began. I ducked into a local coffee shop. I had a habit of trying a new cafe every week, a small freedom to savor, and was immediately drawn to a gorgeous mural covering one wall. It was a vibrant painting of diverse women drinking coffee together under a whimsical city skyline. I was studying the brushstrokes when the barista handed me my latte. Noticing my interest, she nodded at the mural. "Beautiful, isn't it? The owner commissioned a local artist for that. By the way, we're looking for someone to redesign our menu boards and maybe some promo materials. Know anyone?" Her tone was friendly, possibly even hinting given I had my laptop and probably gave off a freelancer vibe. I found myself saying, "Actually, I'm a graphic designer." "Who's the owner?" "I'd love to talk with her." An hour later, I was seated across from Eleanor Marshall in a cozy booth. Eleanor was co-owner of the cafe, an artist herself with silver-streaked hair twisted into a loose bun and paint spattered on her sleeves. She cut straight to the chase. When I started to open my digital portfolio on my tablet, she waved it off. "I don't care about your resume," she said bluntly. "Show me your personal work, the stuff you create because you can't not create it." I hesitated. Personal work? I realized with a jolt that I hadn't done anything purely for myself in years. But I did have an old folder buried deep in my computer, experimental logo ideas, illustrations, random designs I'd made just for fun back when I had inspiration. I opened it, suddenly self-conscious as I slid the tablet over to her. Those designs were bits of my soul I hadn't shared with anyone. Eleanor was silent for a long time as she scrolled through. I sipped my latte, trying to read her face. Finally, she looked up with piercing blue eyes. "You've been hiding," she said matter-of-factly. "This is good work. Really good. Recent." I flushed and admitted, "No. Most of those are a few years old. I haven't felt very creative lately." "Why not?" she asked, not judgmental, just curious. That simple question cracked me open. Maybe it was her frank but kind demeanor, or the fact that she was essentially a stranger. I found myself giving her a raw 2-minute summary. I told her I'd lost my spark over years of trying to design in someone else's shadow, that I had allowed my style and voice to be smothered, and that I was trying to rediscover my passion after a rough patch. Eleanor listened without interruption, her head tilted thoughtfully. When I finished, she gave a single decisive nod. "All right, here's the deal. I'll hire you to redesign our menus and promo flyers. But on one condition, okay?" I said, bracing myself. "You will create one personal piece for me every week. Something just for you. I don't care what. Bring it when we meet, and I'll critique it if you want. But mostly I want to see you doing it. Finding your voice again." She leaned back and raised an eyebrow. "Agree to that, and the menu job is yours. Frankly, even if the menus turn out mediocre, I have a feeling this community will love your style once you set it free." I almost wanted to cry. I was so taken aback by her perceptiveness and generosity. Instead, I smiled and shook her hand. Deal. Working with Eleanor was like a crash course in rediscovering myself. True to her word, each week when we met to go over cafe materials, she'd first ask, "What did you make for yourself this week?" It became a ritual. The pieces I brought her were rough, sometimes half-formed ideas, a spontaneous logo for a fictional band, a sketch of a storefront that caught my eye, a bold new color palette exercise. Some were terrible, and I knew it, but she always gave me some feedback or at least an appreciative nod that I had done it. Over time, those personal projects became the highlight of my week. I felt my creativity stretching awake, like a limb that had fallen asleep and was tingling back to life. Through Eleanor, I started getting referrals to other small business owners in the area. A boutique owner needed a logo revamp. A friend of hers who ran a local artisan food company needed packaging design help. Each project was a chance not just to earn income, but to prove to myself that I was still talented, still relevant, and could work with clients who valued my input. My calendar began to fill up with meetings and deadlines that excited me rather than drained me. During these months, communication from Gregory dwindled and then finally stopped after I formally filed for divorce. I think that was when he truly realized I wasn't coming back on my own. I filed the paperwork through a lawyer friend of Jessica's in Seattle, keeping everything as clean and straightforward as possible. When Gregory was served the papers, I braced for a backlash, but instead I got a flurry of phone calls I didn't answer, and then an email via his lawyer indicating he'd cooperate. The divorce process moved efficiently, likely because there wasn't much to fight over. We had no children, we owned little jointly besides the house, which we agreed to sell, and I had already taken what I needed. During that time, about 4 months after I left, I succumbed to curiosity and peeked at social media again. Gregory's profile showed a photo of him at a company event, smiling with a pretty blonde woman standing close by. The sight pinched my heart just a little, though I couldn't tell if she was a date or just a coworker. Richard had proudly posted an article about their Tokyo expansion, tagging Gregory as the rising star. Amanda, unsurprisingly, had shared a series of family dinner photos captioned pointedly with, "Missing no one." That job surprisingly didn't hurt as much as it might have months before. If anything, it validated what I had suspected. I really was an afterthought to them. They had moved on without a hiccup. Once. That would have devastated me. Now, I found out it actually set me free. I realized I no longer cared about earning their acceptance. I was free to build my life on my terms, without their judgment as my measuring stick. 6 months to the day after I left, a large envelope arrived from my lawyer. Inside were the finalized divorce papers. Gregory had signed them, and our marriage was officially over. He hadn't contested a thing. He didn't even write a personal letter, just a brief note forwarded through the legal channel. "I still don't understand, but I won't fight you." I'm sorry. I sat with that for a while, letting myself feel the sadness of it. It was the end of a chapter one once believed would be my entire life. But I also felt relief. That night, I stood in front of the tiny bathroom mirror in my studio and looked at myself. Really looked. I saw a woman who had been through a storm. There were faint dark circles under my eyes that hadn't been there in my carefree 20s, a new hardness around my mouth that comes from learning to hold back tears. But there was something else too, something new glinting in my eyes. A steadiness. A self-reliance. On a whim, I took a pair of scissors and, with surprisingly steady hands, cut off a good 6 inches of my hair. Gregory had always loved my hair long and flowing. I chopped it into a sharp, chin-length bob. When I was done, I hardly recognized the woman staring back. She looked confident. She looked free. By 8 months into my new life, I had more work than I could handle alone. The small branding project I did for that artisan food company, Rinner Foods, ended up winning an award in a regional design magazine. That brought in a few larger clients who liked my modern yet authentic design aesthetic. I started renting a desk in a cooperative workspace so I wouldn't keep working out of coffee shops or my tiny apartment. Surrounded by other designers, writers, and freelancers in that co-op studio, I found a sense of community. These colleagues respected my work, and I found myself casually brainstorming with them, grabbing lunch, forging new friendships that were based on mutual interests, not obligation. For the first time since college, I felt like I belonged somewhere, and that somewhere was of my own making. By the 1-year anniversary of my departure, the Caldwells had drifted into the background of my thoughts. They felt like characters in a book I'd read long ago. I was aware vaguely that life would have carried on for them much as before, but I rarely checked up on their doings anymore. Meanwhile, my own life was blooming. A lifestyle magazine featured the redesign I'd done for Eleanor's coffee shop, praising the fresh, community-oriented aesthetic. I had been invited to speak on a panel at a local creative conference about rebranding small businesses. I was fully booked with projects that challenged and excited me. I woke up each day with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't invisible. People saw and appreciated my work, my ideas, me. The story could have ended there, with me quietly building my new life far from the Caldwells, but fate has a sense of irony. Exactly 1 year after that fateful barbecue, an email landed in my business inbox that would bring me face to face with my past. It was from a marketing agency called Westwood Creative. They'd seen the Rinner Foods campaign I designed and were impressed. The email read, "We're developing a national campaign for Sheffield consumer brands and believe your aesthetic would be a perfect fit. Are you available for an initial meeting next week?" My heart skipped at the name. Sheffield Consumer Brands is a subsidiary of Caldwell Marketing Group, Richard's company. For a moment, I wondered if this was some sort of trap or test. Did Richard or Amanda orchestrate this to get me back in their sphere, or perhaps to toy with me? I called Eleanor that evening and spilled the details, admitting my suspicion. She listened thoughtfully, then said, "It could simply be that your work is getting noticed, and this is a coincidence." The question is, do you want the project? Don't let fear of your past limit your future, Vanessa. She was right. The project itself was huge. A full rebrand and packaging redesign for Sheffield's entire organic line, with a long-term contract for ongoing design management. The budget alone dwarfed any single project I'd done since moving. If my name was being considered purely on merit, that was a victory I wasn't going to throw away because of the Caldwell connection. After a couple of days deliberating and making sure via some discreet questions that neither Richard nor Amanda would be directly overseeing creative decisions, I agreed to a meeting with Westwood. The initial video conference was with Thomas, a creative director at the agency, and a few of his team members. It was strictly professional. We talked about my approach to design, they walked me through the scope and timeline, and I gave some initial thoughts off the cuff. Not once did anyone mention that Caldwell Marketing owned Sheffield. It was possible they didn't even know of my connection. Westwood was an external agency after all, likely hired because Sheffield wanted something fresh. Thomas called me later that week with an offer. They wanted me as the lead freelance designer on the rebrand. I accepted, but I also set clear terms. All correspondence would go through Westwood, I wouldn't be reporting directly to any Caldwell Group execs, and I wanted a strong attribution clause in the contract to ensure I got public credit for my work. My old insecurities tugged at me. The fear that if Caldwell Marketing got involved, they'd erase my name or claim my work as theirs. But I remembered who I was now. I wasn't that timid girl anymore. Thomas had no issue with my conditions. In fact, he praised my thoroughness. For a while, the project was an absolute dream. I poured myself into creating a modern, earthy yet vibrant rebrand for Sheffield's organic products. The work was challenging and invigorating. I led brainstorming sessions remotely with Westwood's team and felt respected for my expertise. Every design milestone we hit, Westwood sent up the chain to Sheffield's executives, and the feedback that came down was consistently positive. Not a single Caldwell finger seemed to meddle with the process. 3 weeks into the project, an email came announcing that Sheffield would be unveiling their new branding at the upcoming annual Marketing Innovation Gala, a big industry event, and our work was to be showcased. As lead designer, I was highly encouraged to attend, with Westwood providing a ticket and accommodations. My stomach did a little flip. Of course, the Caldwells would be there. Richard's firm sponsored the gala, and the whole family usually attended as the ruling dynasty. This would mean potentially facing them in the flesh, with no screens or cities to separate us. I brought it up in my next therapy session, admitting to Dr. Lewis that the thought made me anxious. She had me lay out my options plainly. I could decline to go and possibly dampen my rising reputation. I could attend but try to steer clear of the Caldwells all night, impossible to guarantee, or I could go and meet whatever happened head-on my terms. What would the Vanessa of today do? She asked gently, as opposed to the Vanessa of a year ago? The Vanessa of a year ago would have avoided that confrontation at all costs, or if forced into it, she would have approached timidly, desperate to prove she wasn't a failure. But that wasn't me anymore. I decided I would go to the gala. I would hold my head high and be there as the designer of a campaign they were proud of. Not as anyone's wife or ex-daughter-in-law, but as me. The week before the event, I allowed myself one indulgence. I visited a stylist that Olivia raved about and splurged on an outfit that made me feel invincible. On the night of the gala, I hardly recognized myself. I wore a tailored deep emerald jumpsuit that managed to be both elegant and a bold departure from the conservative dresses I used to wear in the Caldwell crowd. My hair, now in the chic bob I'd cut months before, was glossy and I'd added subtle caramel highlights. I did my makeup myself, simple but with a strong red lip. As a final touch, I stepped into a pair of expensive designer heels, my first big purchase with the money I'd earned on my own. They gave me 3 extra inches of height and, along with it, a boost of confidence. I looked in the hotel mirror before I left for the venue, and barely saw the woman who had once anxiously tried to appease everyone. I felt a calm readiness. This wasn't a reunion I had sought, but I was prepared for it. The gala was at a historic theater downtown, the kind of venue with grand columns and marble floors that oozed old-school glamour. Inside, the lobby had been transformed with soft lighting, modern art installations, and large screens displaying marketing campaigns. I checked in at the registration table and pinned on my name badge, Vanessa Thompson, lead designer, Sheffield rebrand. Seeing that title gave me a thrill of pride. Almost immediately, Thomas from Westwood greeted me and introduced me around to various industry people. I smoothly navigated conversations about consumer trends and design philosophies, exchanging business cards and LinkedIn connections. I realized with a bit of awe that I wasn't faking confidence. I actually felt it. People treated me like an equal, an expert even, and I responded in kind. About 40 minutes into the event, as I was chatting with a marketing editor of an industry magazine, I sensed a shift in the air. A familiar laugh, Richard's booming, "I own this room" laugh, echoed from the entrance. I knew without turning that the Caldwells had arrived. For a second, I tensed, but I caught myself. I was in the middle of a conversation, and I wasn't about to abandon it or show any sign of discomfort. I finished my anecdote to the editor, made her chuckle, and only then excused myself to get a drink at the bar. Standing at the bar, waiting for a club soda, I wanted a clear head. I scanned the crowd surreptitiously. It wasn't hard to spot them. Richard and Patricia near the door, surrounded instantly by a crowd of well-wishers. Richard shaking hands, Patricia air-kissing the ladies. They looked exactly the same as a year ago. It struck me oddly that my world had upended and they were just carrying on. I didn't see Amanda yet. And then my eyes found Gregory. He stood a little apart from his parents, looking perhaps a touch lost or simply less gregarious. He was thinner than I remembered, his suit hanging just slightly on him. He scanned the room, and suddenly our eyes met across the crowd. My heart gave a complicated leap. Gregory's eyes widened in shock, and he actually took a half step forward, as if drawn by a magnet. In that brief moment, I saw so much on his face: surprise, longing, maybe even remorse. It had been a long time since someone looked that happy just to see me. But I was no longer a woman yearning for his recognition. I held his gaze calmly for a moment, not cold, but not warm either, then offered a polite, distant smile and turned back to the bartender to take my drink. When I glanced back, he was still staring, lips parted as if he'd seen a ghost. I didn't approach him. Instead, I made my way to a circle of Westwood colleagues who were discussing last-minute details of our presentation. If Gregory wanted to speak to me, he'd have to come find me on my turf and on my terms. The first Caldwell to actually confront me was Richard. I was reviewing the printed event program when I sensed someone stepping up beside me. "Vanessa," he said, voice cordial but with an undercurrent of surprise. "This is quite a surprise." I turned to face my former father-in-law. "Richard," I acknowledged with a polite nod. "Good to see you. I'm here as the lead designer for Sheffield's rebrand." He blinked, clearly caught off guard by my directness. "I hadn't realized," he replied, regaining his smooth demeanor. "Sheffield's campaign was outsourced, I heard, but I didn't make the connection that you—" He trailed off, eyes taking in my confident stance, my badge, the reality of me standing there as a professional equal in this space. "Westwood Creative brought me on board," I explained. "We've had excellent results so far. The testing for the new packaging has been very positive." My tone was professional, friendly even, but I kept it all business. Richard cleared his throat. "Well, your work has evolved since I last saw it." I allowed myself a small, genuine smile. Not evolved, exactly. More like returned to its authentic direction. Richard shifted, unused to me correcting him. He gave a stiff smile. "I see." A beat of awkward silence. "Patricia is around here somewhere," he added. "I'm sure she'd love to catch up." Of course, I said noncommittally. I wasn't going to run or seek them out, but I wouldn't make a scene either. He gave me another once-over. I think in that moment truly seeing me as someone beyond his son's wife, perhaps even as a competent adult he couldn't patronize. "Well, enjoy the gala," he finally said. "You too, Richard," I responded, and with a polite smile I turned and rejoined my team. I'll say this for the Caldwells. News travels fast among them. Out of the corner of my eye, I soon saw Richard finding Patricia and whispering to her while glancing in my direction. Patricia's face, typically schooled into perfect graciousness, faltered into a look of shock as she followed his gaze and spotted me. I didn't look away this time. I met her eyes from across the room. She gave me a quick, brittle smile, which I answered with a cordial nod before focusing on the stage where our presentation would soon happen. The moment of truth came soon enough. The lights dimmed and the MC announced the Sheffield Consumer Brands segment. I walked onto the stage with Thomas to present our campaign. As I took the podium to speak about the design journey and unveil the new packaging, I felt a surreal calm wash over me. The bright stage lights meant I couldn't fully see the audience, but I knew they were there, in the front, watching. It no longer unnerved me. In fact, it spurred me on. I delivered a confident, engaging presentation. I spoke about how we wanted to connect the packaging to the consumer's lifestyle, about the design choices that made the brand feel both premium and accessible. I saw nods and even heard some approving murmurs. When I clicked to the before and after visuals, there was a ripple of impressed applause. At one point, I caught sight of the Caldwells in the front row. Patricia was maintaining a polite, neutral expression, the kind she used to wear when hearing news of someone else's kid doing well. Richard was nodding along slightly, clearly pleased with how it reflected on his company. Amanda, yes, there she was. She sat very still, her face unreadable except for a slight frown line between her brows. And Gregory, he wasn't watching the slides at all. His eyes were fixed on me. Even under the bright lights, I could see the shine of emotion there. It was intense, direct, and honestly a little heartbreaking. But I steadied myself and carried on. The presentation ended with robust applause, and Thomas and I exited the stage to congratulations from various industry people. I was immediately swept up by a crowd of well-wishers and interested potential clients. Business cards flew into my hands. People praised the fresh look of the Sheffield line and asked if I was taking on new projects. In the midst of that flurry, I felt a presence at my elbow. I turned, half expecting one of the Caldwells, but it was an older woman from an ad agency wanting to discuss a collaboration. By the time I finished speaking with her, most of the crowd had filtered towards the dining area for dinner. That's when Gregory approached. He came up slowly, hands in his pockets, a posture of uncertainty I recognized from our university days when he wasn't sure of his welcome. The sight tugged at my heart unexpectedly. "You look well," he said softly. "Thank you," I replied, meeting his eyes evenly. "You do too." He managed a faint smile. "I didn't know you'd moved to Seattle." "I know," I said. "That was intentional." He nodded, accepting the honesty. "Your presentation was really impressive. You always were talented." "I always am talented," I corrected gently. Present tense. He swallowed and gave a more genuine smile at that. "Right. Of course." He glanced down, gathering courage, then looked back up at me with an earnest expression I remembered well. I've thought about you a lot this past year. I didn't understand at first why you left like that. It hit me so hard. But he took a breath. I started seeing a therapist on my own. Dad said it was a waste of time, but I needed to understand. And I've realized a lot. About us. About how badly I failed you. I felt tears prick at the back of my eyes, but I held them in check. His voice was raw, and it trembled slightly. This was not easy for him. Gregory had never been one to admit fault readily. I'm glad you did that, Gregory, I said sincerely. For whatever it's worth, I am sorry it had to happen that way. I didn't want to hurt you. I just had to save myself. He nodded vigorously. I know. I see that now. I just want you to know his voice caught. I miss you, he finished, eyes glistening. There it was. The words I had longed to hear for so many lonely years in that marriage. Now he says them. I looked at him, this man I had loved through so many versions of himself, and I felt a wave of compassion and sadness. I would always care about him, but I could not go back to who I was with him. I miss you too, I admitted quietly. It was true in a way. I missed the good times, the simpler times, the potential we once had. But things can't go back to how they were. He blinked away a tear. Maybe and maybe not now. But someday? Could you ever see us? I gently cut him off, shaking my head. Greg, the woman you married, she doesn't exist anymore. And I don't think the man I married is there anymore either, is he? I gave him a small, sad smile. We've both changed. And I think we both needed to. He looked down at his shoes for a moment, then back at me. I've learned a lot this year. About what I want from my life, and what I don't. It's clearer when you're not there, ironically. He let out a soft, sad chuckle. I just want you to know, I understand why you did it. And I don't blame you. I blame myself for not seeing how I let them treat you. How I treated you. I felt a weight lift that I hadn't realized I was still carrying. His acknowledgement was deeply healing to hear. Thank you, I said, my voice thick. That means a lot to me. We stood there in the warm buzz of the gala, just looking at each other. So much had been said in so few words. He seemed at a loss now, hands still in pockets, reluctant to leave my side. I have to join my colleagues for dinner, I finally said gently, gesturing to the tables where Westwood people were gathering. He cleared his throat. Yes, of course. Actually, I'm giving a talk tomorrow at the morning workshop. Digital integration strategies. Will you be there? I will, I replied. I realized Westwood had also signed me up for the workshop sessions the next day. He brightened just a little. Maybe we could get coffee after? To catch up more, or just talk? No pressure. The way he said it was almost boyish hopeful. I thought about it for a moment. Did I owe him anything? No. But maybe I owed myself the chance to have a conversation in daylight, outside of this emotionally charged bubble, to put a more final period on our story. All right. Coffee tomorrow, I agreed. We can talk for a bit. Relief softened his features. Thank you, Vanessa. Before either of us could say more, Patricia appeared seemingly out of nowhere, sliding to Gregory's side. She wore a glittering navy gown and a tense smile. Vanessa, darling, what a delight to see you, she cooed, performing friendliness with just a bit of an edge. And thriving, no less. I gave a polite smile. Hello, Patricia. She tilted her head, assessing me up and down. We've all missed you at family gatherings. No one makes strawberry shortcake like you do, she said with a little laugh, invoking the dessert as if it were some beloved memory rather than something she'd sidelined. The old me would have plastered a smile and said something self-effacing. The new me had no such inclination. Still smiling pleasantly, I replied, That's interesting. I remember that my shortcake was left in the pantry at the last barbecue while Amanda's tiramisu took center stage on the table. Patricia's eyes widened just a fraction. She hadn't expected me to push back so bluntly. Oh, honey, that was just a misunderstanding, she said, doing a commendable job of keeping her tone light. Yes, it was surely one of many simple misunderstandings over the years, I said evenly. Thankfully, I now work in environments where such things don't happen. I let that linger, still with that cordial smile. Patricia's cheeks flushed slightly. I could almost see the Rolodex of social scripts flipping in her mind as she tried to respond. Before she could, the event staff began urging people to take their seats for dinner. I seized the opportunity to gracefully step away. Enjoy your evening, I said lightly to both of them, and with that, I returned to the Westwood table, leaving Patricia standing there, mouth slightly open. Dinner was, thankfully, uneventful. I sat with the Westwood team and a couple of folks from Sheffield's marketing department. Across the room, the Caldwells held court at their table, but I didn't pay them much mind. Once or twice I caught glimpses of Gregory looking my way thoughtfully, and Amanda occasionally flicking her eyes toward me with an unreadable expression, but I was done being concerned with their opinions. I was here for me. After dessert, as people mingled or trickled out, some colleagues invited me to an after-party at a nearby bar. I politely declined. The night had been victorious but draining, and I needed some solitude. I returned to my hotel room, peeled off my heels, and stood by the window overlooking the city lights. I felt good. Strong. There had been no dramatic confrontations, no scenes. I had faced each member of that family on my terms. Richard in professional context, Gregory with empathy and honesty, Patricia with pointed boundaries. Amanda was the only one I hadn't spoken to one-on-one yet, but I had a feeling that moment would come. I slept deeply that night, and in the morning sunlight of my hotel room, I felt nothing but optimism. I dressed in a smart, comfortable outfit for the workshop. I'd be presenting again on a panel, and I chose a soft blue blouse and gray slacks that struck the right balance between casual and professional. Downstairs, the conference center was abuzz with breakfast pastries and coffee. I saw Richard chatting with Thomas from Westwood by the coffee station. They looked perfectly civil, perhaps discussing business. I caught Amanda's silhouette near the stage, reviewing notes. There was a panel on trends where she was likely speaking. Gregory was nowhere in sight yet. I was stirring cream into my coffee when I sensed someone approach. Amanda's voice came, low and hesitant. "Good morning." I turned to face her. We hadn't spoken directly in over a year, not since that challenge accepted moment. She looked virtually the same, impeccably dressed in a tailored blouse and skirt, hair smooth, makeup perfect. But her expression had lost that smug superiority. Instead, it was cautious, even a bit tense. "Good morning, Amanda," I replied evenly. She cleared her throat. "Thomas speaks very highly of your work." The presentation last night was, she pursed her lips, then forced out, impressive. If that was hard for her to admit, I appreciated that she did. "Thank you," I said simply. She looked around as if to ensure no one could overhear, then said, "I didn't realize you'd established yourself here in Seattle. When we didn't hear from you, I think we all," she trailed off. "Assumed I'd vanished into thin air?" I finished for her gently. She gave a tight, rueful smile. "Something like that." We stood there for a beat, sipping our coffees. This wasn't the scene of a catfight or a dramatic showdown. We were two women with a complicated history, groping for civility. Amanda, never one to dance around what she wanted, got to the point. "Father is considering bringing the Sheffield account fully in-house after the rebrand launch," she said. "He's been very impressed with the direction." She eyed me, and I caught the subtext. If Caldwell Marketing took over directly, my role might become unnecessary, or they might attempt to credit their own team. The old insecure me might have cringed. The new me felt only resolve. "That's Richard's prerogative," I replied calmly. However, Westwood's contract has clear provisions about creative attribution. If the campaign continues, I'm sure those will be honored. A diplomatic way of saying you can take your account, but you won't erase my name from my work. Amanda nodded slowly. Of course. Before we could continue, the workshop was starting. She gave me a final, almost polite nod and took a seat. We didn't interact during the morning sessions beyond being in the same room. I gave my panel talk on digital integration strategies. Gregory slipped in just as I was starting. I saw him take a seat at the back, listening intently and smiling proudly during my points, which I'll admit felt good. My segment was well received, and I felt the satisfaction of my growing reputation independent of them. At lunch break, I stepped outside to get a breather in the little courtyard garden adjacent to the conference hall. I had just sat on a bench, enjoying the crisp air and a moment of peace when Patricia appeared. It almost made me laugh. I truly had an uncanny knack for attracting Caldwells whenever I tried to find a quiet moment. She approached with a tentative smile. "You've always had excellent timing for slipping away," she said softly, as if to lighten the mood. I gave a small shrug. "I just know when I need some space." She took that as an invitation to sit. We both looked at a blooming camellia bush for a moment, avoiding direct eye contact. Finally, Patricia spoke. "You've changed, Vanessa." I turned to look at her directly. "No, Patricia. I've just stopped changing myself to fit into places I don't belong." She inhaled sharply at that, but then exhaled, shoulders drooping a bit. "Families are complicated. Especially families like ours, with so much history and tradition." "I understand that," I replied. "I did my best to observe those traditions for 7 years." She winced slightly. "Perhaps we weren't as welcoming as we should have been." "I see that now. But if you felt that way, disappearing without a word, it was rather dramatic, don't you think?" I looked at her, this elegant woman who had been such a symbol of approval or disapproval in my life. "Patricia, I left a letter explaining myself to Gregory. I took nothing that wasn't mine, and I tied up all our mutual obligations. I made a very considered, adult decision to remove myself from a situation that was breaking me. There was nothing dramatic about it. It was necessary. For the first time ever, I saw genuine emotion flicker across Patricia's face. Uncertainty, maybe even a little hurt. "Gregory was devastated," she said softly. "Gregory was inconvenienced," I corrected gently. "There's a difference." She looked away, eyes misting slightly. "You have no idea what it's been like this past year for him. For all of us." I bit back a sharp retort and instead replied evenly, "You're right. I don't know. Just like you have no idea what the 7 years prior were like for me." That landed. Patricia closed her eyes briefly. "Touché," she murmured. We sat in silence for a while, the sounds of traffic and distant conference chatter floating by. "I'm not interested in tallying hurt, Patricia," I said finally, more softly. "I didn't come here to rub anything in anyone's face. I'm here because I'm good at what I do, and my work has value, as you can see." I gestured toward the building. "That's all." She nodded, a slow, resigned nod. "You always were stubborn." I let a tiny smile through. "Determined. There's a fine line." That actually drew a small chuckle from her. To my surprise, her eyes glistened as she regarded me. "Will you be at the closing dinner tonight?" "Yes. Westwood has a table." She smoothed an imaginary crease in her skirt. The salmon is usually excellent. Such a banal comment, but it carried years of unspoken sentiments. It was the kind of thing she would say to me when I was part of their family, a little maternal small talk. It oddly disarmed me. Good to know, I said softly. The workshop resumed, and we parted with a nod. In that conversation, I felt something shift. Maybe not a reconciliation, but a mutual acknowledgement that our relationship had profoundly changed and that perhaps we both bore regrets. That afternoon, Gregory and I did indeed have our coffee. We walked a block to a small cafe in the lobby of the hotel and sat in a quiet corner. At first, it was awkward. We talked about Seattle's weather, of all things. But Gregory soon steered it to what he needed to say. He told me about how Amanda's behavior after I left had started to grate on him once he was dating someone new. She started picking on Claire. You remember Claire from my office? We went out a few times. And I saw it. The way Amanda can be. For the first time, I really saw it and called her out. We didn't talk for 2 weeks after that. He told me how Patricia had tried to tighten her hold on the family, scheduling mandatory dinners that he sometimes skipped, to his parents' disapproval, because he was in therapy or just needed space. He was speaking, in a way, to fill me in on all the aftermath I wasn't there to see, but also to show me he changed. And I believed him, to a point. I could see the growth, the newfound self-awareness. He had, in many ways, been as much under his family's thumb as I was, just with far less pain from it because he was their golden son. It took my absence for him to wake up to it. When our cups were empty and the afternoon sun was slanting through the window, he finally asked, voice low and hesitant, do you think, is there any chance for us to, start over someday? I reached across the little table and gently took his hand, something I hadn't done in so long. Greg, I think you and I were meant to grow apart. Maybe this past year was the first time either of us really grew as individuals since we met. I like who I am now, and I can see you're working on liking who you are. But those two people, I don't think they were married to each other. We've both moved on, even if it doesn't feel that way yet. A tear slipped down his cheek and he brushed it away quickly, turning his palm to squeeze my hand. I understand, he said, voice thick. I had to ask. Because I'll always love you. I didn't appreciate what that meant before, but I do now. I squeezed back and then let go, giving him a warm, sad smile. I'll always care about you too. And I truly hope you find happiness, Greg, real, honest happiness. He nodded, composing himself. You deserve the same. Clearly, you found something here. I'm proud of you. When we parted, it was with a hug that felt like goodbye and a new beginning at once. I watched him walk away, and in my heart I truly wished him well. That evening, before the closing dinner, I was packing up my portfolio and laptop in the conference room when Amanda walked in. It seemed she had been waiting to catch me alone. She closed the door behind her, arms folded, and got straight to it. I need to know, she said, chin lifted in that challenging way of hers. Did you take the Sheffield project knowing it was linked to our family? I sighed internally. So she thought I might have come back to haunt them? No, Amanda, I answered patiently. I was contacted by Westwood because of my work. I didn't know until after I'd signed on that Caldwell Marketing was involved. And by then, I wasn't going to quit over it. She studied my face for honesty. Finding it, she pressed, and it never crossed your mind to. I don't know, turn it down once you knew. You hated us enough to leave everything. But you're okay working on a project that benefits our company. I looked at her, really looked. For so long I'd seen her as this villainous figure, but right now, she just looked human. And oddly vulnerable in her confusion. Amanda, I said slowly, I'm very good at what I do. This project needed someone with my skills. I wasn't about to throw away an opportunity for my career just because it tangentially benefited a family company. The truth is, not everything revolves around you or your family. My decision to leave was about me, not you. And taking this job was about me, not you. She blinked. Clearly, the thought that my disappearance might not have been all about them hadn't occurred to her in that way. Her voice wavered just a touch, at the barbecue, when I made that joke. I truly didn't think you'd actually leave. It was just a joke. I finished for her, my tone gentle. Maybe to you. But to me, it was the final confirmation of something I'd felt for years, that I didn't matter to any of you. That I was invisible, disposable. I took a breath. I don't expect you to understand. But that joke was more than a joke. It was the last crack in a wall that had been crumbling for a long time. Amanda's mask of confidence cracked. She looked actually upset. I never intended to make you feel like you didn't matter. That's harsh. I raised an eyebrow slightly, but accurate. In the context of your family, I really didn't matter, Amanda. And that's what I finally realized. So I found somewhere I do matter. It doesn't excuse how cruel the joke was, but in a way, you were right. My absence didn't matter to the Caldwells. Life went on and you were all fine. And once I accepted that, it freed me to build a life where my presence does matter. She was quiet for a moment. Then she murmured, Greg hasn't been the same since you left, I gave a small, sad smile. He's finding his own way, I think. As he needs to. Just like I did. Amanda looked at the floor, then up. So that's it then. You and Greg are done. We're divorced, I said plainly. So yes, we're done. But we've both made peace with it. We had a good talk today, actually. She absorbed that, then in a voice so soft I almost didn't catch it, she said, Your work yesterday? It was really good. Even if you were a stranger, I would have thought so. That might be the closest to a genuine compliment I'd ever get from Amanda Caldwell. And I believed her in that moment. I smiled. Thank you, Amanda. She hesitated at the door, as if wanting to say more, but instead just gave a little nod and left me alone. I exhaled deeply. That was closure of a sort. The closing dinner was almost anticlimactic after everything that had happened. I sat with Thomas and a few other creatives. Across the room, the Caldwells sat together, but the dynamic was different now, at least from my perspective. They were just people. Flawed, human, not gods on thrones or ogres under bridges. Just a family with their own issues and blind spots. At one point, when a few of us from Westwood were chatting with some industry folks, Richard was brought into the conversation and introduced to me as the designer behind the Sheffield campaign. He shook my hand and said, "Yes, we're very pleased with the work Ms. Thompson has done." Ms. Thompson. The formality of that, in place of using my first name as family, actually felt like respect. Patricia passed by me at the dessert buffet and commented graciously on my outfit, admiring the jumpsuit. I thanked her sincerely. There was a gentleness there now. We weren't friends, not by a long shot, but maybe we understood each other a little better. The most surprising moment was during an end-of-conference presentation by Amanda. She was leading a segment on upcoming marketing trends, and in one of her slideshow examples, she included a slide of the new Sheffield packaging with a note in the corner crediting design by Vanessa Thompson. It was quick, and probably only I and a handful of others noticed the fine print, but she had given me public credit. A year ago, she likely would have pretended I didn't exist. It felt like an olive branch, small but meaningful in its way. As the event wound down, I exchanged contact info with several new potential clients and collaborators. Gregory found me just before we all parted ways. He simply said, "Safe travels, Vanessa. And good luck." The warmth in his eyes told me everything else I needed to know, that he would be okay, and so would I. Walking out of that hotel for the last time, I didn't have a triumphant movie moment feeling. Instead, I felt quiet satisfaction. I had proven to myself that I could walk into a room of my former tormentors and not only hold my own, but shine. I reclaimed my story in front of the very people who tried to write me out of theirs. And now, they were just part of my past, appropriately sized, no longer looming large over my sense of self. A month later, back in my beloved Seattle, I met Eleanor at our usual coffee shop corner table. Rain pattered against the window as I updated her on everything. The Sheffield campaign was launching successfully, and Westwood was thrilled. Richard's company had indeed reached out formally about possibly hiring my small design studio. Yes, I'd evolved to thinking of it as a studio now, for future projects under proper contracts. Life, it seemed, had a sense of irony, from family outcast to sought-after creative partner. "That's quite the evolution," Eleanor remarked, clinking her mug to mine. "Proud of you, my dear." My portfolio was now full of work that felt mine. Bold, colorful, heartfelt, not a trace of the timid designs I used to make in the Caldwell shadow. I was carving out a place in the regional industry as someone to watch. The divorce, once finalized, brought surprisingly few entanglements. We sold the house. I refused any alimony that might have been on the table. The only thing I asked to keep was my original engagement ring, not to wear, but because it had been my grandmother's stone. Gregory had been understanding about that, letting me have it set into a necklace instead, which I sometimes wore as a reminder of where I came from. Therapy tapered down. Dr. Lewis and I agreed I had gotten what I needed, tools to continue growing on my own. In our last session, she told me something I'll never forget. Healing isn't about going back to who you were. It's about becoming someone new, someone stronger, because of what you've been through. I truly felt the truth of those words. When Jessica came to visit me for a girls' weekend, she marveled at the change. We hiked through Discovery Park, and she laughed when I laughed, pointing out, "You laugh differently now. From your belly, not your throat. You used to laugh like you needed permissionness. Now you laugh like it's your own damn idea." We both cracked up at that, and it felt wonderfully true. I began dating again slowly, casually. I met a few nice men and had some pleasant evenings, but I was blissfully in no rush. I learned to enjoy my own company and the thrill of possibility without any desperate need to pin it down. One unexpected friendship that blossomed was with Charlotte. Yes, that's Charlotte, Michael's wife. She ended up emailing me about some design help for a pediatric charity she was involved with, and our professional chat turned into a personal one. We realized we had a lot in common in how we viewed the Caldwell clan. Soon enough, we were having monthly lunches where she would catch me up on family gossip, which I found, to my surprise, I could listen to with detached amusement. During one lunch, Charlotte mentioned that Amanda was expecting a baby. "She's taking parenting classes," Charlotte said, wide-eyed with something between skepticism and hope. "Apparently she's determined not to repeat family patterns." That genuinely made me happy. "People can change when they want to," I said, thinking of Gregory in therapy and of myself. "Your leaving shook things up," Charlotte noted quietly. "It made them all look at themselves a bit, even if they'd never admit it." I smiled. Maybe. Either way, I'm just glad if they grow from it. I genuinely meant that. I didn't need vindication beyond my own life. But if my exit had in some ways sparked introspection among them, it was a bonus. Not long after that, on a crisp Saturday at the farmer's market, I ran into Amanda herself. It was an almost comic coincidence. I was examining tomatoes, and she was at the next stall sampling cheeses. She was visibly pregnant, about 7 months along I guessed, and the sight of her in maternity wear, looking a bit tired and very un-Amanda-like as she concentrated on choosing a cheddar, was strangely humanizing. She noticed me, and for a split second I saw uncertainty flash in her eyes. But I gave her a genuine smile and said hello. We chatted briefly about the produce of all things, and the upcoming product launch for Sheffield, which had been very well received nationally, by the way. And then, in a move that took me by surprise, Amanda took a deep breath and said, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about contexts where you're valued versus not. Preparing for this baby, it's made me realize how much I don't want to carry on certain things." I looked at her, this once immovable force in my life now speaking with a hint of vulnerability. "Everyone has advice about who I should be as a mother, how I should change," she went on, adjusting the strap of her market bag. "It's illuminating. I'm realizing that I have to figure out who I am outside of all that noise." "Contexts do shape us," I agreed. "But they don't define us unless we let them." She nodded, then admitted, "I don't want my child to ever feel like they have to disappear to be seen." It was the most heartfelt thing I'd ever heard from her. In that moment, I saw the potential for a different Amanda, one who had been scarred by the same family culture that hurt me, albeit in a different way, and who wanted better for her own child. I didn't absolve her past actions, but I respected the honesty I heard. "That's a very good place to start," I told her gently. We parted on amicable terms. No grand gestures, just mutual understanding that time had changed both of us. That night, in my little house near the water, yes, I had saved up and bought myself a tiny cottage with a view of the Puget Sound. It wasn't grand, but it was all mine and I loved it. I curled up with my journal by the window. I wrote about the journey of the past year or so, how a cruel joke became the catalyst for me reclaiming my life, how I vanished from a place I wasn't valued and reappeared somewhere I was, how I lost a family that never truly accepted me, and built a community that celebrated me. The irony of Amanda's challenge wasn't lost on me. She said no one would notice if I disappeared, and maybe she was right in that context. But by disappearing there, I found a life where I am noticed, needed, and fulfilled. I ended the entry with a reflection that came to me as I watched the lights reflecting on the water. Sometimes you have to disappear from someone else's story to find your own. The opposite of disappearing isn't being seen by them. It's seeing yourself clearly and being fully present in your own life. I closed the journal, made a cup of tea, and stepped outside to my little porch. The Seattle sky was dark, the city lights twinkling in the distance. I felt peace. Not the brittle peace of appeasement I used to chase, but the solid peace of self-contentment. A year and some ago, I raised a hot dog in defiance to a cruel challenge, not knowing what on earth would follow. Now, I sipped my tea, smiling at the memory. That woman back then couldn't have imagined this life now. And the woman I was now would never trade back for anything. Sometimes the worst thing said to you can become the best thing that ever happened to you. I disappeared, and in doing so, I found myself. Have you ever had a moment when someone's cruel words pushed you to make a life-changing decision? Thank you for watching and listening to my story. Take care and good luck out there. After hearing today's story, perhaps you're left with new questions or reminded of old memories. Every day on Reddit and beyond, people share experiences that teach and connect us. Each of us is on our own unique journey, understanding life in our own way. Moments like these remind us that we're all human, sometimes happy, sometimes hurt, and always learning something new. If you enjoyed this story, please feel free to share it with your friends. Your thoughts and feedback mean a lot to us. They inspire us to keep creating better content. Every story has its own angle, and we strive to understand different perspectives to make our content diverse and relatable. Stories like these show us that everyone's life journey is different, and by listening to each other, we can learn and grow. You're welcome to share your own stories or experiences with us too. Your voice matters. If this video resonated with you, let us know in the comments. We aim to create content that brightens your day and gives you something to think about each time. Even if you've heard this story before, your feedback can bring a new perspective and help us improve. What we saw today is just one of countless stories shared on the internet and around the world. It's a reminder of how we all seek to understand life by sharing our experiences. This video is an example of how storytelling can connect us, showing different sides of life and the lessons they hold. We hope to continue bringing you such stories, heartwarming, thought-provoking, and real, that help us all learn and grow together.